The United States of America possesses vast wilderness areas and ancient mountains that attract many hikers, climbers, and campers every year, just as they have for thousands of years. People vanishing in these areas isn't new, nor should it be all that surprising, but for some, it's a little different. Some disappearances in these areas contain unusual circumstances that manage to baffle law enforcement, soldiers, and searchers alike. Let's start with 5-year-old Pamela Hollingworth, who disappeared in the White Mountains in the state of New Hampshire. This happened on the 28th of September 1941 and appeared in the press quickly the following day. The Hollingworth family consisted of the father, mother, Pamela, her 9-year-old brother Teddy, and 2 grandparents who were present that day. They had been walking for some time at this point, enjoying themselves, and had stopped at the State Reservation picnic grounds at around 2:15 PM for a nice family break. As the family were enjoying themselves, Teddy and Pamela had wandered about 100 yards away from the parents next to a trail. The pair left the view of their parents for a minute to go down into a little brook where they played in the shallow water. A minute or so had passed, and Teddy came back out of the trail area alone. The parents, noticing this, got up immediately and asked where she'd gone, but Teddy had absolutely no idea. Basically giving the idea that as they were playing, he turned around and she just wasn't there anymore. What's fascinating about this is that whatever happened here, it went down quickly. The parents ran to the brook area and began calling out for Pamela, but they never received a response or heard her. She, within the space of a minute or two, had gotten far enough away as to not be able to hear the calls from her parents. Pamela's plight was reported by her father, Joseph Hollingworth, after he, his wife, their son, and the children's grandmother, Mrs. Minnie Moulton, had searched the woodland for around 3 hours. So this was quite surprising. The family searched for 3 hours without finding anything. They were poking and pushing into the woods near the brook, all the while calling out. But again, they never received a reply. Almost immediately, the thought seemed to be that this situation was ridiculous and there's no way she could have gotten very far. So the question became, what if she hadn't left the area but had gone underwater in the brook? This comment was made early on. Deputy Sheriff Taylor said the brook where the children were playing was extremely shallow and could not have concealed a body. He said his men found no indication that the child had fallen into the water. Later in the day, this was stated. One woman reported to searchers she thought she saw the child wandering along a country road an eighth of a mile away from the picnic grove, and a message was sent to the police that Pamela might have been picked up by a motorist. Because of this singular report, law enforcement began to believe that a crime had been committed here and that Pamela had been taken by a third party. It comes across as though, because this area was in the process of being scoured by over 300 people with bloodhounds, it was felt that she had to have been found quickly if she was still there. So when the searchers and the dogs came up with nothing, it seems to have left people a bit puzzled. Now, in the event that she was still in the woods, there were other concerns arising too. At dawn, the child was still missing, though relatives, professional searchers and forest rangers, under the supervision of Deputy Sheriff Herbert Taylor, had scoured the thickets near White Ledge Camp throughout the night. Taylor feared for the child's safety because she was lightly clad and near freezing weather prevailed during the night. This, of course, was not a good sign, and temperatures were below freezing all throughout the night and early into the morning, and thereafter was still very cold during the next day. As you can probably imagine, this situation had become even more serious very quickly after the temperatures dropped to sub-zero. Because of this, the following day another 150 people would join the search, bringing the total to around 450 at this point. Deputy Sheriff Harry Leavitt said 150 searchers, including soldiers from Fort Devens, were beating through the woodline as 2 airplanes flew overhead in search of the girl. This, of course, still wasn't enough to find her, and at this point, it does really feel that the prominent idea circulating among the searchers was that she'd been taken. It reads as though there was a disbelief that she could have gotten so far away to avoid everyone in such a short time. It was said that this was a rugged area off the trail and not easily traversable at all, which would be especially true for a very young person. The sheriff then had another thought. The sheriff pointed out that Pamela might have found refuge in some secluded cabin and that all such buildings were being searched. She wasn't found in any such cabin, and at this point, the authorities were fully leaning into the idea that she'd been taken because from their point of view, this made absolutely no sense at all now, which is going to become very interesting. Here's a headline by the Lowell Sun. No trace of child yet, suspect ex-convict. 8-state alarm, questioned in several cases in the area from which girl vanished. Given that headline, it would seem as though there might have been other disappearances in the area too. In any case, let's have a further look at what was going on. A one-time New Hampshire convict was hunted throughout the East today as a suspect in connection with the search for Pamela, who vanished Sunday from a White Mountain picnic grove. This man is wanted on suspicion of felony, taking Pamela. The suspect was questioned early this week. Pamela was not the strongest girl in the world. These 3 nights in the open mountain air would have been too much for her physique. She had to watch what she ate. Perhaps it's best to think that someone had picked her up and is now keeping her in one of those mountain cabins. At least, she will be alive and saved from wandering through a chill New Hampshire wood. You can imagine just how devastated the family were feeling here. The mother said that she hadn't slept for a single moment since she disappeared. The family also made it known that while they didn't want to admit it at first, the immediate gut feeling was that she may have been taken. The family explain again. Pammy and Ted took their water bottles and went down to the lakeside to get some water. They returned in 2 or 3 minutes. They then took another trip to the water and Pammy never came back. Joe raced through the woods like a wild man. He fairly fled through the surrounding thicket. He would return at intervals, each time showing more concern. From the very beginning, he said that he thought someone had taken Pammy. He said that she couldn't have disappeared so quickly. Given all the details that are known about this disappearance, I find myself in full agreement with the father that this was very strange. We're talking about a very young person that disappeared so ridiculously quickly and then seemed to have managed to get very far away in such an unreasonably short amount of time. It didn't make sense to the family. It didn't make sense to law enforcement, who seemed to prefer the idea that she'd been taken. And it doesn't make sense to me now as I make my way through this. The searchers did identify footprints that were small and believed may have been left by Pamela. There's no real detail here other than this picture in which the father was inspecting them with other searchers. Unfortunately, the footprints seem to peter out into nothing. A bloodhound was headed today into the dark, cold woodlands where more than 300 men are searching for Pamela. The dog, trained by Rhode Island State Police, led the 4th search. Forest Ranger Jacob Ryerson said that the chances of finding Pamela alive were about at the limit of reasonable hope. It's important to note too that the ex-convict was voluntarily going to speak with the police at this point every time they called him, and each time he said that he had nothing to do with it. I think that these suspicions arose in the first place because he was thought to have been in the general area of the mountain that day. The exact proximity isn't mentioned. Anyway, this was thought not to be the case at all when she was found on the 9th day of the search. This was absolutely puzzling for everyone, with doctors saying that it was a miracle and that they couldn't explain how she was in such good condition for being missing in a freezing wilderness area for this length of time. The father of 5, deliriously happy, is thanking all for their aid in his 9-day heartbreaking search for Pamela. which came to a miraculous ending late yesterday when the little wanderer was found sitting on the banks of a mountain brook, about 2 miles from where she disappeared. Dr. Albert William, chief surgeon with the CCC outfit, who beat the brush down to earth in efforts to find the youngster, gave the best news of all when he stated that Pamela was in sound health. "It is a miracle, but nonetheless true," said the doctor. "Her lungs are normal, her heart is normal, and Pamela will be alright. The circulation through her swollen feet has been compromised, but warmth and medical care will save her feet." This was just truly remarkable for her to be in such good condition. Almost everyone involved either believed that she'd been taken by the ex-convict, some other third party, or that she had succumbed to the freezing temperatures. Pamela herself did make some comments. "I haven't been lost at all. I guess my parents got lost. I've been looking for them. I've been looking for them since Sunday, but I couldn't find them. I've just been looking around. I walked a lot. I didn't eat any berries because I was afraid I might get sick. I didn't see anyone at all the time I was gone. No, I'm sure I didn't see anyone. I lost my hair ribbons, didn't I? But I didn't take them off. I didn't take my shoes off. I didn't want to hurt my feet, but they do hurt." Pamela was found in a state of confusion and seemed to be somewhat confused too while later giving those quotes. Though of course, she was only 5 years old and missing for 9 days without food, so it's not as if that wouldn't be expected. The whole incident must have been highly disorienting and traumatic. I found this particularly interesting. After being found, law enforcement initially repeated the idea that they believed that someone else must have been with her, but they took it back after Pamela's comments, changing their opinion to state that she was alone. This was coupled with others too who held the opinion that she wasn't alone. News of her safety led some observers to the belief that she had been taken and then released by a third party. But Dr. Charles Smith, who examined her after she was taken to a hospital, said that there was nothing to indicate that she'd been out of the woods. Let me just make this clear too, what is being said is that there were no signs of any kind of indecent assault or anything like that. Pamela's mother said, "I didn't really believe that she was in the woods." So incredulous were many persons, including some veteran woodsmen and soldiers, at the child's stamina that they freely expressed belief that she had been taken, held in a cabin or some such place and then released on a mountain trail. Even after hearing Pamela, there were those who remained absolutely convinced and steadfast that something was not adding up here. They seemed to find it bizarre that she managed to evade the searchers for so long while managing to somehow stay warm during the freezing cold temperatures. It seems that law enforcement were being berated somewhat too by the local populace, because people were absolutely convinced that there was more to this than meets the eye. Taking recognition of the skepticism, which appeared to be widespread, the lead investigator called newsmen to his office in a midnight conference and told them, "I have found absolutely no evidence to support the theory of her being taken." The doctor said, "Then I examined her all over. There were few, if any, effects from exposure. There was hardly a scratch on her body, save her knees which were chafed from crawling. Attending doctors tell me that she suffers from occasional nightmares. She shouts out something in the middle of her sleep about 'it's wet' or 'it's raining out', but that is not a bad sign and is to be expected." Perhaps to make this even more remarkable was the fact that it wasn't only around and below freezing for the entire time, but it had been raining a lot too, which is the perfect recipe for hypothermia. That was basically the end of the paper trail, and good actual lord, what an absolutely breathtaking incident this was. In the end, I suppose all that matters is that she was found, but if she says that she'd been alone the entire time, what can you really do with that? It's amusing too, because a lot of people simply didn't believe her, it seems. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. I'd love to know more about how she spent her days and what her time overnight looked like. Now, given that's seemingly the end of the reports on this incident, let's have a look at one more. David Taylor was 23 years old when he disappeared from Mount Rainier National Park. David was actually a park ranger and worked at this particular park, and over the years he worked there, he had become quite familiar with the mountain itself. He and his friend, another park ranger who he worked with, 27-year-old Carl Fabiani, made plans to ascend the mountain together. They embarked on this trip together just after mid-November in 1974, but something would go awry on the 18th. The first I heard of this disappearance was from the East Liverpool Evening Review. The search for a missing National Park ranger who disappeared while climbing Monday on Mount Rainier was scheduled to resume Thursday morning. Missing was David Taylor. Carl made his way off the mountain early Wednesday morning, the 20th. John Parks, Chief of Operations for Mount Rainier National Park, said if Taylor is unhurt, he could survive a couple more days. This is one of those massive problems faced when something goes wrong in these kinds of wilderness areas. Something had happened to David on the 18th, but it took Carl 2 more days before he was able to get down the mountain to report it. The way Carl explained how David disappeared was quite ominous. He said that as they were ascending the mountain, a whiteout had occurred. A foggy mist and snow quickly descended on the area and practically had covered all of the landmarks. He said that the two went far away from one another, about 100 feet, but as they were engulfed by the whiteout, they lost sight of one another. He went on and said that as he made his way towards David, he just couldn't find him. He was calling out to David, but he wasn't hearing a reply. A rescue party spent Wednesday night camped at the 7,500 foot level of the mountain and was scheduled to begin climbing at daybreak. Fabiani told officials that he and David became separated during the whiteout at the 9,500 foot level on Success Cleaver when visibility was lost due to blowing snow. It took 40 hours in stormy weather to climb off the treacherous Cleaver, cross 2 glaciers, and descend through the woods to safety on the west side of the mountain. Fabiani told officials that he and David had begun the summit attempt on Friday 15th, but gave it up on Sunday 17th at the 12,500 foot level because of deep, fresh snow, potential avalanches and poor visibility. Fabiani told officials that he and David were about 100 feet apart when they became separated. 100 feet is 33 yards, so they were very close together at the time of his disappearance. It's hard to imagine how they might have lost one another in that moment, given their close proximity. You'd also have expected that David would have been able to hear Carl's calls for him, but he never responded. Perhaps David panicked and accidentally fell in that moment where visibility became so bad that they couldn't see each other despite being so close. I'm not sure what else actually makes sense there. Actually, after some further reading, it also seems that Carl reasoned to himself that David must have fallen too. Carl reasoned that David must have fallen Monday as he and Carl were retreating from the long rib of volcanic rock rising from the base of Pyramid Peak. Fabiani looked for David Monday and Tuesday, then struggled back, weak and hungry to get help. He could be up there somewhere. He's resourceful, strong, well equipped with a tent and plenty of food, if only the weather would clear. The area where this took place was searched, but no trace of David could be found, and it was said that there was no evidence found of him falling, though that would presumably be because if he had have fallen, he would then have been completely covered by the snow in probably a short amount of time. Hope seemed to drain from the efforts to find him when the searchers themselves became pinned down on Mount Rainier due to another whiteout and avalanches that were occurring nearby. The park rangers weren't ready to give up though. A fresh 4-member rescue team planned to resume the search for a national park ranger missing on the mountain. Park officials said that the new crew, consisting of veteran mountaineers, was dispatched to replace the exhausted team, who had established a base camp at the 9,000 foot level. This raises another point about just how dangerous these areas can be. The searches look absolutely nothing like they do on the ground because you quite literally need experts, highly trained search teams to be able to search these areas effectively and safely. meaning that the number of searchers is always going to be extremely limited in comparison to a normal search effort. You would think that if David had fallen, then Carl would have heard a shout or call for help or something like that, but he never did. The way it was described was that the whiteout occurred quickly and they were engulfed quickly by the fog and falling snow, which reduced visibility so much that they couldn't see one another from 30 yards away. He then made his way towards David, but he couldn't find him. So what happened in this moment? Did David have the same idea and accidentally wandered away in the wrong direction and then got lost? I can't imagine that to be the case, because that means he also didn't hear Carl's calls for him, though it was probably very noisy at the time if it was windy. In the end though, it wasn't possible to understand exactly what happened, and as far as I can tell, David nor his remains were ever found. What do you think happened here? That was the end of the paper trail, so I suppose with that, now is a good time to end this video and hand it over to you in the comments below, so do let me know your thoughts. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around and disappearing on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell, and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike, I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, peace.